It's completely dark, not dim, not the kind of dark where your eyes adjust and you start to make out of shapes. I mean the kind of dark where you can't tell if your eyes are open or closed. The water is 98 degrees, equal to my body's temperature. So is the air. There is no sound. There is no light. And there's no sensation of where my body ends and where the water begins. I'm floating. Floating in the greatness of the dark. I've been in deprivation tanks before. I know how to quiet my brain, or at least I thought I did. But this time is different. This time, it's my brain, but also a little help from Mother Earth. And somewhere in the dark, something cracked open. I saw my life, my world, and I started to cry. Not a sad cry, and not a fearful cry. The kind of crying that happens when something you've been carrying for 30 years finally has space to be put down. And in that moment, in the complete absence of everything, I saw my kids. I saw my life. I saw why all of it had happened. The hard parts, the worst parts, the part I almost didn't survive. And I finally understood. I finally walked through the next door to the next chapter of my life. This is that story. This episode is for anyone who has ever felt something stirring, something underneath the noise of your life, and you weren't sure if it was real or if you were just broken. But here's the truth. You are not broken. You're just waking up. You're tuning in and walking through the door. Welcome to episode 5 of Colorful Pricks. So before we go any further, I want to take a second. We're going to talk about mental health, about darkness, and about a moment in my life where I almost didn't make it, and the effects of that choice. If you are in a tender place today, please take care of yourself first. This episode will be here when you're ready. There is no rush. And if you or someone you love is struggling, please reach out. You can call or text 988, that's the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, anytime, day or night. There are real people, there's real support, and you're never alone. I want to start by telling you something that took me a long time to understand about myself. I have never been anti-faith. I've never been anti-God. I have never looked at someone who believes deeply and faulted them for that. What I am is someone who spent a long time looking for God inside frameworks that kept telling me I wasn't doing it right. And none of it ever felt like love. The truth is, I didn't grow up in a religious household. My mom's story with religion was complicated before I was even born. Her mother was a Jehovah's Witness. My mom was eventually kicked out of the house at a pretty young age because of a mistake she made within the religious constructs that she was raised in. What she endured inside that house was painful enough that church and religion weren't really a thing for me when I was little. And honestly, looking back, I think that was her trying to protect me from the thing that had hurt her, without ever saying so. But I was always feeling things. Looking back, the word for it might have been spiritual or intuitive, but as a kid, I just didn't have the right words for it. I could literally walk into a room and immediately know what most people were feeling. I absorbed other people's emotions like a sponge. Their sadness became my sadness. Their anxiety became my worry. Even their illness I would take on at times. I saw people, and still do, in color before I see them as a person. I didn't have any language for any of that. I didn't know what an empath was. I just thought something was wrong with me. That I was too sensitive, too intense, just all around too much. At least that's what people would tell me. I spent a lot of years trying to turn that down and trying to turn that side of me off. And failing many, many times because it was never something I could turn off. It's just who I was. It's just who I am. But when I was a teenager, my mom shifted. She turned back towards religion, harder than I expected, and our household shifted with it. Things I loved started disappearing. For instance, Halloween being one of my favorite holidays. It was suddenly evil. Santa Claus got shelved for my younger brother before he was old enough to lose him naturally. These small joys just got quietly removed because the church said so. And for some reason, my mom agreed to it. I remember feeling angry about that, not really understanding why things I had loved were now a problem. That was probably the first time I started noticing the pattern. That religion, the way I was experiencing it, was less about welcoming people in and more about deciding what was right and what was wrong. It was less about love and a lot more about rules. I had a close friend in high school, and his family was deeply Christian. And I remember sitting outside with him one day wearing a cross necklace that I had purchased. He asked me why I was wearing it. And what I told him is that I got it because I just thought it was cool. He launched into the whole story. The sacrifice, the resurrection, the blood spilled for my sins. And I remember sitting there feeling this wave of shame wash over me. And I was somewhat embarrassed. Not because I had done something wrong, but because I didn't know the story. And honestly, I didn't believe it. I couldn't make myself believe it just because someone needed me to. Now, I want to be really clear about something. There were people inside religion who showed me real love. My wife's family, for instance. When I met her in college, she was Lutheran. And sitting around their table felt different. There was prayer, but there was also warmth and acceptance and laughter. And I felt like I belonged there. And for the first time inside of a religious context, I felt something close to what I was actually looking for. So I leaned into it. I started attending church with her, and I thought maybe this was the version that was going to help me find myself, or at least find God. I even considered becoming a youth pastor. I loved working with kids, I loved the community, and I thought maybe this was the direction that I was supposed to go. But there was always this low-level disconnect that I couldn't shake. A quiet voice underneath everything saying, this still isn't quite right. And when we decided to get married, the church wouldn't allow it because I hadn't been baptized. I wasn't a member. So I ended up having to take classes. And I stood in front of the entire congregation and got publicly baptized so that I could marry the woman I loved in the building where she grew up. The building where her entire family had roots. And I went along with it because I was desperate to feel connected. To myself, to something. I remember when we were building our wedding ceremony, we wanted to play some music by Enya. Just instrumental. It was beautiful, quiet, very moving for the both of us. But the pastor pushed back because it wasn't approved hymns. Even then, even in that small moment, I thought, why does having faith always come with conditions? After we got married, we moved to Denver. We found churches that we loved, we built community, and I genuinely enjoyed those times. I felt connected. I felt like I belonged somewhere. But we eventually moved back to Grand Junction and had our 2 kids, and we enrolled them into a Christian school. This was the same church that we'd gotten married. It's the same building where I had been baptized, the same walls where I had made my most sacred commitments. And for a while, I told myself this was it. This was the right place, the right container, the right path to God. Until a teacher inside of that school used that church and used the Bible against my son. Now, I'm not going to go into everything about what happened because that's not what this episode is about. But I will tell you this. I was not calm. I was not graceful. I was livid. It was the kind of anger that comes from somewhere so deep inside of you that it actually kind of scared you. There were members of the church that were physically standing between me and this teacher because of how angry I was. And what was said to me, to my face about my son, even Jesus is not going to be able to save your son. Yeah, that was the moment. Not a quiet exit, not a slow drift away. It was a door slamming shut. Because here was a place where I had been baptized, where I had married my wife, and where I had brought my children to be shaped into who they were going to be. And it had just shown me exactly what it was made of. Fear dressed up as love. I had been seeing that pattern my entire life. I just finally had the words for it. What I didn't know yet was that walking away from religion wasn't the end of my search for God. It was just finally reaching the beginning of it. After I walked out of that church, I didn't go looking for something else to believe in. I just stopped. For the first time in my adult life, there was no framework, no community built around a shared doctrine, no pastor, no youth group, No Wednesday night couples Bible study. Just me and the silence where all of that used to be. And the silence was not kind. During that time, we moved a few times. Moved the kids to public school, kept church and religion at a distance. But just as I was putting distance between myself and religion, I was also putting distance between myself and everything else. My family, my life, myself. And I want to pause here for just a moment before I keep going. What I'm about to share is something that I've held privately for a long time, and I'm choosing to say it out loud on this podcast because I believe with everything in me that our stories, the hard ones, the ones we've been most ashamed of, are exactly the ones that set other people free. And please know, 988 is always there. Call it, text it. You don't have to be in crisis to reach out. Sometimes you just need to hear another voice. As I have shared in previous episodes, in March of 2019, I attempted to take my own life. I'm saying it again because it deserves to be said. Because as dark as that moment was, it became one of the most important pivots of my entire life. Not dramatized, not softened, it happened. I walked up to the edge of something and I stepped off. And I'm still here. I'm still here with more clarity and more healing than I ever thought was possible. I thought a lot about how to talk about that moment, like what it means, what it was. And the only framework that has ever made sense to me is this. On some other timelines, I didn't make it. But on my timeline, I woke up. And that's not minimizing what happened. That's me telling you that surviving it completely reoriented who I was. It was not the end of my story. It was a door that I had to walk through. It was the hardest door I have ever had to walk through. And on the other side of it was a version of my life I could not have imagined from where I was standing before. But I had to walk through it to get there. After my attempt, I started seeing a therapist. And she was different from anything I had expected. She didn't just want to talk about what happened. She wanted to talk about who I was. And pretty early on, she said something to me that I genuinely didn't know what to do with. She told me I was one of the more spiritually connected, deeply intuitive people that she had ever worked with. And I remember looking at her like she had three heads, because I had just tried to end my life. I was barely holding myself together. I didn't feel spiritually connected to anything. I felt like a man standing in a field after a fire. She persisted. And one day she put a box in front of me. It was pretty small. It was like maybe 5 inches square. And she said, "Tell me what's inside of this." And I thought she was messing with me. But I closed my eyes and I sat with it. And I started describing what I sensed. A color, a smell, a texture, something soft, something pink or red, something that smelled like baby powder, something of comfort, of care, something of safety. And then she opened the box. And inside was a piece of pink yarn from a baby's blanket. I genuinely thought I had been set up. I asked her how she did it. I couldn't accept it as real, because accepting it as real meant accepting something about myself that I had been taught my entire life to distrust. That I actually knew things I had no logical reason to know. That what I felt was real, and that I wasn't broken. I was just wired differently. She referred me to another practitioner not long after that. Someone who worked with energy through the feet. Now, I know how that sounds. I thought the exact same thing at the time. And this woman sat with me for a while and she looked at me and she said, "You're not from this planet." And I laughed. I genuinely laughed. But she kept going. She said I was a deeply spiritual being who had been chosen to be here in this life, in this body, for reasons I hadn't fully uncovered yet. But that the time was coming. I took that information and I filed it away. And I told myself, well, that was interesting. A little bit weird, but that's fine. And I went back to working on healing myself and my life. But something definitely had been planted. A seed that was going to take a few more years to break the surface. The years that followed were still hard. I'm not going to pretend that the door I walked through in 2019 opened in some beautiful landscape. It opened into more personal work, more growth, more unraveling, both personally, financially, professionally. I was still being asked to carry a lot, and I was rebuilding my sense of self through the ground up without a map. But I started reading. I started reading slowly, cautiously, almost like I didn't want anyone to see me doing it. Authors like Dolores Cannon and Michael A. Singer, books that didn't preach at me, but invited me to consider. Books that made me very, very curious. And something in me that had been tightly wound for decades began to just barely loosen up. I still didn't call it spirituality. That word felt a little too loaded, too connected to everything I'd already left behind. So I just called it curiosity. And then that's when the numbers really started showing up. Everywhere. Constantly. 3, 4 kept showing up over and over and over again in ways I could not explain. On clocks, on receipts, in addresses, in the middle of conversations. In fact, right now as I'm saying this, it's 2:34 on the dot. I'd see it and feel it all the time. Not quite recognition, but not quite memory. Something older than both of those. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew it meant something. And then someone from my past reached out. They asked if I'd ever considered a psychedelic float, psilocybin, a deprivation take, a complete sensory journey in silence. And I said yes. In October of 2024, I drove down to a little town here in Colorado named Montrose with a dear friend of mine. We went to a spa called Soak Wellness Spa, where I met with the owner, Crystal Bradburn. Crystal and I knew each other from years back. She had worked at my parents' coffee shop. And somewhere along the way, she had embarked on her own wellness and awakening journey and wanted to bring that experience to others. To people looking for clarity in a chaotic world, people like me, we spent some time with Crystal before anything began, talking through our intentions, making sure our bodies were ready and open to the psilocybin, and just allowing ourselves to receive whatever needed to come through. I was nervous. I won't pretend that I wasn't. And I hadn't really ever done anything quite like this before. But underneath the nerves was something stronger. It was curiosity and excitement. A quiet knowing that my mind had something it had been waiting to show me. And I was finally ready to listen. And I'm going to take you back to that room. That's the room that everything had changed. It was kind of like the preparation that she gave us as we walked through. It was very intentional. This isn't recreational or big party to have some other type of experience. This was very structured, extremely purposeful, and setting our intentions. Knowing you are opening your mind to the powers that be. You take the psilocybin, you get in the water, and then you let everything go quiet. And then you wait. No light, no sound, no sensation of your own body. It's just you and whatever is left when all that noise stops. You know, I had done float tanks before, and I know how to settle in. But this was different from the first moment. Something was already moving in me before I even got in the water. And then I saw them. I saw my kids. Not as a thought, not as a memory, but as revelation. Clear and bright and completely unmistakable. It was my daughter and my son. And I was shown that they were my 3 and my 4. We had lost our first 2 pregnancies, 2 babies we never got to hold. And so the children who made it, our daughter, our 3rd, and our son, our 4th, they were the ones that were carrying those numbers. And they always have. And I'd been seeing 3, 4 everywhere for months without understanding why. And in that tank, in that dark, I understood. I was shown that my daughter, my 3, needed me to be a pillow for her, a place of softness, a place that she could land, not directing her and not shaping her, just holding space for her to become exactly who she is meant to be. And my son is my 4. And he was shown to me as a mirror, a reflection of everything I was as a little boy. Sensitive, intense, curious, too much for the rooms that he was put in. And my job, the job I had been given, was to protect that in him the way nobody protected it in me. To let him be free, to let him be curious, to let him be exactly who he is without shame, to give them both space, to let them both take up space. And I started to cry. Right there in the dark, in the water, completely alone, completely held, with so much love, all at the same time. And I wasn't crying because I was sad. I was crying because I finally understood why all of this was happening. The church, the anger, the door I chose to walk through in 2019, the hard years, the rebuilding, all of it, every single piece of it had been necessary. Not punishment, and not bad luck, and not the universe testing me. I didn't end up here by accident. None of it was by accident. It was all love, even the parts that didn't look anything like it. Building the exact version of me that my kids needed their father to be. Building the exact version of me that was going to be able to do what I'm here to do. And I laid in that water and I felt the shame leave my body. The guilt I had carried about my attempt. The challenges that I had put my family through. The grief about the years I have lost. The anger at every framework that had ever failed me. I put it all down. And when I came up from that tank, I was not the same person who got in. What happened next I can only describe as chapters of my story that are starting to open and close over and over and over again. I closed my tattoo studio of 16 years at the end of 2024, a chapter closing. I went to Ibiza for a tattoo retreat and had an artistic awakening there that has since changed the entire course of my work, a chapter opening. I went to Greece with my family and stood in ancient places and felt something in that land recognize me. Or maybe I recognized it. I'm not sure that the difference really matters, but another chapter, another door. I started meditating in ways I had never had before, not trying to quiet my mind anymore, but actually listening to it and following it, trusting what it had showed me. And what it started showing me was extraordinary. I was having visions, beautiful imagery, beings and landscapes and light that I had no rational explanation for and no desire to explain it away anymore. I started writing it all down. Every dream, every synchronicity, every moment of knowing that arrived without a logical source. And I've called it my book of remembrance because this wasn't new information coming in. This was memory coming back. And then there's this podcast, showing up and sharing my life, the ups, the downs, the messy middle, open and vulnerable, almost to a fault. And that's a chapter 2. And painting. Truth be told, I hadn't picked up a paintbrush before 2019. And now my very first show in Carbondale this May. And the work I'm bringing to that show looks nothing like anything I could have made 5 years ago. Because I'm not painting from the outside anymore. I pick up a brush and I paint what I see when I close my eyes. What comes through in meditation. The visions, the beings, the cosmos, the light. My canvases have become a record of my inner world. Not executing someone else's vision. Not meeting anyone's expectations. Just what's true. My truth. And my tattooing has cracked open the same way it did. 18 years of precision and control and performing perfection. And now it's looser. It's freer. It's more honest. It's less about executing and more about channeling, because that's what I had always been doing without knowing it. Sitting across from the person after person who brought me their grief, their survival, their love, and their becoming, and helping them mark it permanently on their body. I was always doing this work, the healing work, the holding space work, the you are not alone in this work. I just didn't have the language for it yet. But walking through the door in 2019 led me here, to a rock bottom that cracked me open, to an awakening of awareness and self-love I couldn't have found in any other way. And because of that door, from a place that has nothing to do with religion and everything to do with truth, I have never felt closer to God, the source, the light. And here's what I know that I didn't know then. We all have access to this. Every single one of us. The light, the source, God, whatever word doesn't make you flinch. It was never somewhere else. It has always been right here. Now, before I let you go, I want to ask you something. If this episode resonated with you, if something I said today landed in a place you didn't expect, or named something you've been feeling but couldn't find words for, please take a second and follow, like, and share Colorful Pricks. Not for me, but for the person in your life who's in the dark right now and doesn't know it yet. For the one who is just starting to feel something stirring and is too afraid to say it out loud. For the one who has been told their whole life that they're too much, too sensitive, or too intense. Every time you share this, you are dropping a seed. And you never know whose soil is ready for it. That's how we do this together. That's how nobody has to feel alone on this road. So if this found you at the right time, please pass it on. It might be exactly what someone you love has been waiting to hear. And now I need to say the thing that is the whole point of this entire episode. And the whole point is this. The system has lied to you. And I don't mean that with anger. I'm not standing here pointing fingers or tearing anything down. I'm standing here because I lived it. And I know I'm not the only one. The framework you were handed, the one that said God is the building, accessible only through that book, filtered only through that person standing at that podium, that framework was never the whole truth. It was a map drawn by human hands, passed down through generations by people who were also just trying to find their way. People who were also afraid. People who were also searching. But here's what they didn't tell you. You're not the map. You're the territory. The heaven you were told to earn, it's not somewhere you go after you die if you followed the rules correctly. It's inside of you. It has always been inside of you. The love you were told you had to be worthy of, you were born worthy of it. The connection to God, to source, to the light, again, whatever word doesn't make you flinch, that connection cannot be revoked. It cannot be withheld. It cannot be given to you by a pastor or taken away by a teacher who told you Jesus couldn't save your kid. It was never theirs to give or take. It is yours, and it has always been yours. Now here's the part nobody wants to hear, and I say this with so much love. Nobody can show you this but you. Not me, not this podcast, not a book, a crystal, a retreat, a teacher, or a guru. All I can do is I can share my story. I can plant the seeds that I believe need to be planted. And I can sit here and tell you that what you're feeling is real and that you are not crazy. But the walk, sorry to say, but that's yours. And it's every single step of it. And that should not be seen as a burden. It's a gift. Because what you find when you go looking, really looking on your own terms, in your own time, belongs to you in a way that nothing that could be handed to you could ever make it feel any different. You don't have to follow my path. And you don't have to use my language. You don't have to believe what I believe. You just have to get honest enough with yourself to start asking the questions that you've been avoiding. What do I actually feel? What do I actually know? What have I been carrying that was never mine to carry? The awakening isn't a mystical, exclusive club. It's not reserved for the spiritually gifted or the enlightened few. It is simply the process of stopping and getting quiet and learning, maybe for the first time, to trust what you feel and not what you've been told to feel and not what you are shamed out of feeling. what you actually feel. That boy who walked into rooms and felt everyone's colors, he wasn't broken. He was tuned in. That teenager who wore the cross because it was beautiful and felt ashamed for not believing the story correctly, he wasn't wrong. He was sovereign. And that man in the deprivation tank crying in the dark, he wasn't falling apart. He was finally coming home. And if you are somewhere on that road right now, just starting to feel the first tremors of something shifting, or deep in the middle of the unraveling, where you are fully lit up and just looking for someone who gets it, this is me. I get it. You're not crazy. You are not too much, and you are not broken. You are waking up. The timing of that is not mine to decide, and it's not yours to force. It will happen when it's supposed to and when you're ready, when the quiet finally gets loud enough that you can't ignore it anymore. And when it does, the only thing you will need, the only thing that you will ever have needed, is already inside of you. Your light is the way. I'll see you next time.